Welcome back, everybody, to A Little Less Fear podcast. Today, I would like to introduce Sherene McHenry, Dr. Sherene McHenry. She's the people IQ expert. Dr. Sherene McHenry is a former graduate professor turned full-time speaker and author. Sherene has spoken on 3 continents, authored multiple books, and writes a syndicated magazine column on leadership and interpersonal issues in the workplace. Sherene has a PhD in counselor education, is a certified speaking professional, and past president of the Michigan National Speakers Association. This is incredible. Welcome to A Little Less Fear podcast, Sherene.
Thank you so much. I couldn't be more excited to be here with you.
And it's incredible to finally meet you. Thank you for your patience. So as people know, listeners of this podcast, this is a motivational podcast, and I'm already motivated by reading about you here, and I can't wait to hear your journey. So please tell us about your journey. What brought you to where you are at today?
So as a kid, I was always told I should be a teacher, but I didn't want to be a teacher because my parents were teachers. And my mom in particular, she worked so hard. And my brain went, there's no way I'm working that hard for that little bit of money. The two just didn't connect. But I had been given this gift of the ability to break complex things down into very simple terms. And so I was always translating for people and just going, oh, here's what you need to know. And so I went to college, majored in extracurricular activities, and had such a great time that I knew I wanted to help other college students. And so my mentor said to me, well, if you're going to work in a college, you need to get at least a master's degree. Otherwise, you can only move this way. You know as well as I do the power of mentoring, because if she hadn't have told me that, my life would be very different. Right. But I always want to be teachable. And I went, well, I'm going to want to move up. So went and did my master's degree, and I was working in career services at Winthrop University in South Carolina. And I had the opportunity to teach a critical thinking course, which was their freshman course. And I fell in love with the light bulb of learning. I love when people's eyes light up with understanding.
I know, I love that feeling too. It's incredible.
It's the best, isn't it? And so that was the clue for me. And it was also a clue that I was in the wrong job. So I had learned how to interview and job search. And I've always said, well, I can get any job I want, basically. Might not be able to keep it for more than 2 hours, but I know how to prepare for an interview. But when I was younger, like maybe your listeners, there are some of them, I didn't know myself very well. And so to me, it was just like, this is what interviewing is. This is what you do. Then you get the job. So I gave them all the right answers that I knew that they would want to hear. And so they offer me a job thinking they're getting this person who I've presented myself as being without even realizing as a young woman that I was very inauthentic. And so I'm in a job that does not use my passion, does not use my skill set. And I had the imposter syndrome so badly. I'm sure you've worked with people like that. But every day I would wake up and I would think, will today be the day they figure out I don't know what I'm doing? And
Sherene, do you mind if I'm going to interrupt you here. I'm sorry about that. For people that do not know because there's listeners of all ages, for people that don't know what the imposter syndrome is, could you explain what that is?
Absolutely. It is knowing that we're not qualified and feeling like we don't fit. And sometimes it's real, and sometimes it's our insecurities. And so every day I would just wake up thinking I was going to be outed, and I didn't know what I was doing.
That's not a good feeling at all.
No. Never. And so I became depressed, and I wasn't getting my work done, and it was just not good. And so I was just unhappy, but my boss sent me to a time management seminar. Instead of asking me what's going on, why aren't you getting stuff done, she threw a solution at it that didn't work. But I finally was miserable enough that I made my way to counseling. And in that process, I began to tell myself the truth about how I felt, about what I liked, about what I didn't like. And I began to tell myself the truth that this was a really bad job fit. And because counselors had helped me, I'm seeing a thread here, I wanted to be able to help other people. But my dream was to teach counselors. So God wired me to want to have a very broad brushstroke. And so my thought was, well, if I was a counselor and I saw people, I would impact, thousands of people. But if I impacted and taught 20, 30, 60, 90 graduate students a year, and they saw that many people throughout their lifetime, my impact would be exponentially magnified. So I'm hunting you've had some of these same responses, and hopefully listeners have too.
Oh yeah, it's wonderful to think of it that way, especially when you know that you can expand and it keeps expanding. That's really the best feeling right there.
Well, especially like with your podcast, think of the lives that you are reaching that would never make their way into your office as a therapist.
So true.
Yes. And then I get really geeked out still about when we impact lives, then they're impacting other people. And so it's such a ripple effect. So anyway, packed up my bags, went to the University of Wyoming, got a doctorate in counseling, became a professor at Central Michigan University. And the first fall, a colleague knocked on the door and she's like, hey, somebody backed out of a speaking engagement. Would you like to fill in? The topic is Mom Loved You Best. And I went, sure. And I don't know about you, but I'm one of those people, everything sounds good in the short run.
Yeah.
And so, well, this will be great. And 20 minutes later, reality sets in and it's like, what the bleep was I thinking? Because when I was in 9th grade, I took the only speech class I've ever taken. I could still cry. I can feel it in my, just feel my heart. I got up there and I got the nervous giggles as only a young woman can do. And the teacher yelled at me. He's like, sit down and take an F. Oh my and I had never failed anything up until that point. I had never been yelled at by a teacher or a coach. And I remember sitting down and these white hot tears of shame running down my face. And I remember thinking, I don't like speaking. But in hindsight, what I didn't like was being shamed and being bullied and being spoken to in an abusive way, especially be it in private or in public, but in front of my peers, it was devastating as a nine.
That's very devastating.
Yeah. So here I am now caught between a rock and a hard place. And my enthusiasm, I said yes. And then reality crashes in and all my fears come back. And I want to be a person of integrity. So I didn't turn them down. And I just thought, I'm going to gut it out. I'm going to do the best that I can do. And I'm just not going to turn them down. But the stress was off the charts. And it was so fun, Dr. Martinez. I got up there and I made them laugh. And I went, oh my gosh, this is fun.
When you made them laugh, was that going to be part of the speech, or was it just naturally came out that way?
Happened. I have a pretty good sense of humor. I have an innate ability to read an audience and to play. And if I'm having fun, they have fun. I didn't know all this at the time. Yeah. All I know is the more they laughed, the funnier I got. And the funnier I got, they laughed. And we had this incredible hour. And so afterwards, somebody came up and said, would you speak for my group? I'm like, sure. That's the best thing that's life. And so I would just speak and speak. And finally, one day, a couple of years later, somebody said, well, what would it cost to bring you in? I'm like, wow. I didn't even know you could get paid to do it.
Right.
And so then I figured out that people made a living as professional speakers. Yes. And that was when my true calling of my heart was reached. But I was a child of educators. There aren't any entrepreneurs in my family. And so figuring out how to be a businesswoman was phenomenally difficult for me. But somebody pointed me to the National Speakers Association and to a specific book. And I got the book and I did what I had to do for membership. They don't have those requirements anymore. So if there's a budding speaker in your audience, I hope you'll get on the website. It's NSA.org, but it's the National Speakers Association.org. Anyway, through that, I honed my skills and became a much better speaker, but I learned the business of speaking. And so I look back to, for about 16 years, I wanted to quit my job, but I wasn't making enough money and I was very, very fearful. And literally my fear was so great that when I would think about quitting my job, I can feel it again, I would get teary-eyed because I was afraid I wouldn't have enough money to eat. But faith is a big part of my life. And I felt like it was finally time and I was supposed to take this leap of faith. And I put my letter of resignation in and then squirreled away all my money until I finished up my job so that I'd have some runway. And scariest thing I've ever done was leaving a tenured full professorship, and people didn't understand. It frightened some people in my life. Others just were baffled. Why can't you be happy? That's a great job. And I'm like, it is a great job. I'm good at doing it, but it's not a great job for me. So that was almost 12 years ago. I have never looked back. I get the privilege of making my life as a speaker, making a living and impacting lives around the globe, doing what gives me the greatest joy. Am I blessed or what?
Absolutely, Sherene, you are. I'm wondering how you got the courage to take that leap of faith, to leave such an incredible job and just say, you know what, this is what feels good to me. I don't have much money, but I'm just going to go all in. Where did this courage come from? Was this just something that was innate, something that was, you feel
No.
was inside you? No?
No. So I was thinking a lot about being on your show and how fear had played such a large part of my life. You know, when I was a little kid, I was afraid. As I grew up, I was afraid. When I went into counseling, as I told you, in my early 20s, I remember the psychiatrist saying to me, you just have more fear than most people. Well, I don't know what to do with that, but thanks for telling me. And so I began to realize that one of my patterns was that I was making decisions based on what I feared might happen.
Whoa.
And that was a turning point for me because I thought that does not get me where I want to go. That's a defensive posture. And I made the courageous for me decision that day that I figured that out, that I would only move toward what I wanted, not away from what I feared. And so that was big. And then the other thing was, it was truly a leap of faith that I believed that I was called to do it and that it was the time and that I was supposed to do it. And if I hadn't have done it, I would never have felt right. So turning in that resignation letter. And it's kind of funny. My last act as a faculty member was graduation and I was a marshal. And so I'm sitting in the very first seat because I had walked the grad students in. And all of a sudden, I'm not kidding you, I felt myself go, no. Reaching for the cliff of the university. And then I looked at the cliff and I went, but I don't want that cliff. And I went, okay. But my knee-jerk reaction was terrified.
Yeah.
So I think I had to dig within. I think one of the things that I do when is the right thing to the best of my ability. That's one of my strengths on the Strength Finder is do the right thing. And so I just felt like it was the right thing at the right time and that I was supposed to do it regardless of how I felt. So I think that would be for me a big act of bravery because it was an action and it took every ounce of courage that I had.
So how does someone do the right thing, Sherene, if they're unsure of the outcome?
Oh, you ask good questions. You must be a trained therapist. So let me think about this. Let me noodle it.
Sure.
What comes to mind is I don't think the outcomes are what determines what the right thing is. I think the right thing is listening to our hearts and doing what we believe is right, and then trusting that the outcomes will come. Does that make sense to me? They're very different. So here's what I believe is we're all put on this planet for a purpose, and that each of us has what I call the whispers of the soul. And those things, those are the clues, the thing, maybe two. It's not a lot of them. There's just very tiny whispers of the soul that are clues to why we're on the planet. And the whisper of my soul was to be a full-time speaker. And I could ignore it. I could put it away. I could say, I'll get to you someday, but it never went away. It would just circle back. And I one day thought, well, is there anything else you want to do? And the answer was no. And then it's like, well, then figure it out. And for me, I ended up hiring a business coach. And I think I would still be a semi-happy, unhappy professor had I not hired a coach to help me get to where I wanted to go and to help me through my fears. And the other thing that I did that maybe your listeners need, or maybe some of them have done. But I had to go back and do some real trauma work and to get over the deep, deep fears that my body was trying to protect me from. And once I was able to work through traumas, then even though I was still pretty terrified, it was not like frozen terrified. I cannot do this. It's like, oh, I'm going for it. I'll figure it out. And then my backup plan was, if I couldn't make it, I would work at the gas station out by where I live.
Oh my goodness. Even though you could go back to school and university, huh?
Oh, people have asked me many times, would you be a professor again, or would you teach? And my answer always is, if starvation were the alternative, I'd be happy to. But no, it was just not the right fit. And what I'm doing is so much more the right fit that I can't even fathom the thought of going back. That would be like selling a part of my soul. And the picture that flashed in my brain was, it would be like opening up a cage and walking back into it. And it's one thing when we're stuck to be in a cage, but I think once we taste freedom, once we taste the fulfillment of the whisper of the soul, that to walk away from that, you would have to sell part of your soul or deaden part of your soul to stay alive. And I want the best part of me to stay alive. And that's the part that's optimistic and cheerful and doing what I love and believing that I can change relationships and lives and organizations around the world. That's the part of me I want to feed.
So Sherene, you're on the side where a lot of people are really seeking to be, which is finding their inner joy, manifesting their dreams into reality, finding that happiness, that peace where they can go to sleep at night and know that they're doing what they're meant to do. And in order for some people to get there, a lot of coaches say, well, or I'm even going to be speaking in the terms of Abraham Hicks, who's one of my incredible speaker who I love. Abraham Hicks often saying, go towards that blissful feeling. And when you chase that blissful feeling, that's where all of your dreams will become a reality. So I'm wondering for you, before you were in the bliss that you are in now, did you go into that world where you would think about being a speaker? And if so, what types of feelings did you experience when you thought about being a speaker professionally or full-time or for the rest of your life?
Oh my gosh, such a good question. So yes, I have never heard it in the terms that he put that, but the follow your bliss, the blissful feelings. I feel like from a career point of view and from what we're supposed to be doing, I always liken it to the child's game of hot and cold. If you're somewhere cold, move. And
I love that.
Yeah, if it's warm, don't get stuck, but it's clues. And I always think there are always breadcrumbs, just follow the breadcrumbs. And so I've always been willing to see and follow the next breadcrumb, even if I don't know exactly where it's leading. And then when you get to hot, you're in the right spot. And so
I love that.
Thanks. That's my philosophy of career counseling.
I love that philosophy. And so how does someone know that they're getting hot?
It feels better and better, and it's more joy. And I do believe with all of my heart that what we should be focusing on and heading toward are the things that energize us.
Yes.
Yes. So one of the clues is, if something doesn't give you joy, don't get stuck. It's okay to be there. It's okay to plan your strategy, build your runway, but don't get stuck. And, I fly places. I'm always seated next to interesting people on planes. And I can't tell you how many people say, hey, what do you do? Because my background is career counseling, but what do you do? And they'll tell me, and I'm like, hey, how do you like it? And I bet 85 to 90% of the people go, oh, it's okay. I'm just like going, this is America. This is a day and age where we have the ability to be almost anything that we want to be. And I'm not just saying you wake up one morning and it happens. I mean, I worked really hard, just as you did, to earn my doctorate. I worked really, really hard to become a professor and a tenured full professor. I worked really, really hard to learn the business of speaking and to hone my craft. And so this is a point where I have no imposter syndrome, because I've spent the last 30 years speaking. When I get on a stage, I'm going to knock it out of the park, because I wouldn't have said yes to the engagement if I couldn't do that. And
Exactly.
so I just think we just don't get stuck. Follow the joy. And if there is no joy, that is the biggest clue. And that's when people become martyrs. That's when they begin to have mental
Right.
health and physical issues
Yes.
because they've settled, and our soul knows when we settled and it's not content. And so I want to live life to the fullest. And I want your listeners to. And I always say, you know, at the end of my life, I want to be able to say, I am so glad I did, not I wish I would have.
I'm so glad you did.
You, me too.
Sherene, you talk about 5 types of people. How did you come up with this? And can we talk about these 5 types of people?
I would love to talk about 5 types of people.
All right.
So my whole life, I've been an observer. So I'm always watching what works, what doesn't work. And I've primarily honed in on people. And that's why I'm the people like you expert, is I've just spent a lifetime watching people, studying them, writing about them, doing research. But I'm always watching what does and doesn't work when it comes to people. And when I was a professor early on, I tried to treat everybody the same because I wanted to be fair. But what took me a long time to figure out that treating everybody the same was not fair, and it didn't bring out the best in everyone. So there were some students that I was the rock star professor who set them up for success, and others I probably about drove them to drink, and others we kind of had some butting heads. And so I began to the 5 love languages. Are you familiar with them?
Yes, I did actually, I was part of a conference about a month ago, and that was my topic.
I love it. So just happenstance, Dr. Gary Chapman was an adjunct professor in my undergrad, and he
Amazing.
taught us the 5 love languages, and it radically changed my life. Oh my gosh, I understood people and why a couple primary relationships weren't working. And
So true.
I had actually thought I wasn't loved. And after learning that, I could see overwhelming evidence that I was. I mean, it
Yeah,
was,
everybody has their own way of expressing love. And oftentimes we think that if they're not expressing it the way we're expressing it, that they might not love us. But once you learn
exactly.
these love languages, then you're able to accept love in all its different forms.
So sorry about that.
Not at
Yeah,
all.
so that's it exactly. And so I just, because it wasn't in my language, I couldn't hear it, and it was in my blind,
Exactly.
I couldn't see it. And so anyway, so I have Chapman. I used to talk about his stuff all the time. He and I got in touch with him just to make sure it was okay. I was speaking about his stuff, and he was fine with that. And so I began praying, and I'm like, God, I would like something as simple and profound. Would you give me something as simple and profound as the 5 love languages that will change lives, relationships, and organizations around the world? And this is what he gave me. And so here are my 5.
Okay.
High flyers: reliable, hardworking, conscientious, would rather die than let you down. They're success magnets because they work so hard. They're also at very high risk for burnout, and they have a hard time saying no. And so the things that they have to do are learn how to take care of themselves and learn how to say no, because otherwise they're going to burn out, and then they'll be no good for anybody. But they'll keep working because that's how they're wired. And then the second type are steady gliders: hardworking, reliable, conscientious, but they're not as competitive. They're not as driven. They're actually values-based driven. And so their value is what matters the most. And that's their community. That's their cause that they care about, or their family. So they turn down promotions and opportunities because it doesn't fit with their life space, because something is more important. They also are the people who want to go in at 8, be done at 5, and then not have to think about it until 7:59 a.m. And they don't want to be the leader, where the high flyer almost always wants to be the leader, not always, but is leadership driven. So you got the high flyer, steady glider, and then you have lackers. And these are people like me when I was in my 20s, where I kept running into the same brick wall, imposter syndrome. I wasn't performing well, but I didn't know what was going on. And so I had a mindset problem and I needed counseling to help me over the wall. And if skill training works, it's a skill, it's a knowledge problem. That's all it was. But if training doesn't work, then something else is going on and it's deeper. And so that's where coaches are invaluable, and counselors, and the people that you learn and grow from. And so how do we get over what's holding us back? And then the next type is the slacker. And there are people who are lazy and they do not mind that other people have to work harder to enable them.
Oh, yeah.
You know, there are those people. But for the most part, what is identified as a slacker is a rocket. And so rockets can be as hardworking as a high flyer, and they can be reliable and conscientious, but rockets need deadlines. They sit on launch pads. And so really bright leaders and people who understand themselves know that they need an external deadline. And so I'm a rocket, and I always felt broken because I was raised by a very, very high flyer. And all the people who write the books and tell you how to do stuff are almost always high flyers. And then rockets are vilified because rockets kind of put stuff off. They think about it. They prefer to work under the deadline because it gets everything going, and it also forces them to make decisions. And so if there is a deadline, external deadline that's held, then the rocket will launch and they can go to the Mars and beyond. It's just amazing what a rocket can do. So they need deadlines, they need quality control, and they need to understand they're not broken. So I look at myself having been a broken rocket who felt really bad about who I was and that I was lazy, and that's not true. But you have to find what a rocket cares about if you want them to really take off. That's that part of knowing your soul. And then the other thing is deadlines and external deadlines and quality control. So as I matured and as I grew, I began to realize that my behavior impacts other people. And so here's what the external deadline does for me is I'm not going to let you down because I said I would do something. That's part of being a person of character. And I'm not going to let myself down because I don't want to embarrass myself. And so rockets are, once you understand them, rockets are easy. So you've got high flyers, steady gliders, lackers, slackers, but most of those are rockets who need deadlines and quality control. And then the last type are hackers. And those are probably people who are unhappy and trying to cause problems. So there are people who are lacking conflict resolution skills. I call them lacker hackers. But then there are covert hackers who stir the pot and do it behind your back. You don't know what's happening because it's all very subtle. And they're always watching for where the breaks are and where then they can come in and divide and cause division and distress. But it's always behind your back. And then the last type is the overt hacker. And those are people who are sarcastic, they're rude, they yell at you. My speech teacher in 9th grade was a hacker. And you know, a high flyer, anybody can be a hacker, especially if we're lacking conflict resolution skills. And high flyers can be lacker hackers really easily because they know that they're doing more than their share of the work. But that overt hacker, some of it is bad behavior, but some of it is broken. And so the research in the US says that 5 to 7% of the US population has a personality disorder. And so they aren't wired the same as 93% of the population. They don't have empathy. They don't see how their behavior impacts other people, and they don't take responsibility for what they do. So these are people that would be narcissists, what we would call personality disorders. And if you're running into one of those, and I've worked with lacker hackers, covert hackers, and overt hackers, but they're meaner than they're street fighters. They don't feel compunction necessarily about taking people out or getting in their way. And so they groom people over their head. And it's really interesting because they play a game before most people understand that there's even a game board and the game is over. But it's about division, and overt hacking is all about silencing, shaming, and wounding people because they want to take them out and they want to control the board. And there's a mean-spiritedness about it that the lacquer hacker doesn't necessarily have.
Sherene, we talked about what the high flyers need, and we talked about what the steady gliders need, and what the lacquers need. We're talking about needing skill training, counselors, and slackers needing quality control and deadlines. What do hackers and overt hackers need?
Oh, you are so good at your job. You're going to be the next Oprahs, I'm convinced. So I love it. This is one of the best, probably the singular best podcast I've ever been on, because you ask fascinating questions. So lacquer hackers need conflict resolution skills. End of story. Learn conflict resolution skills, have the courage to enact them, and deal with problems as they arise, and the hacking behavior will go away. The covert and the overt hacker, they're almost always going to need some mental health counseling because it's about manipulating people. And oftentimes it's about, if I can create drama, then I feel alive. And if I can get people pitted against each other, you hear people say, most people wouldn't say this, but a hacker will say, I like pitting people against each other and seeing what happens. It's sport. And so
and they're not embarrassed or anything by it.
There's no shame.
They're speaking their truth. Yeah.
Yes. And it wouldn't even occur to them to cover it up. And so the normal person would say, ooh, if I'm going to do that, I'm not going to tell everybody or tell anybody. But so it's do your mental health work because you deserve more. Right. And you deserve to achieve without tearing people down. You deserve to have peace and joy and the things that come from doing our mental health work. And so if there is somebody out there who's a gossiper and a manipulator or a bully, controlling, sarcastic, again, designed to wound, silence, and shame, if you're out there doing that, do the mental health work. Do what it takes so that you can achieve, so that instead of having to do that, you have peace, you have joy, you have hope, and you have something incredible to offer the world and to build it up. But you got to do your work because it doesn't magically happen.
That is 100% true right there. That's for sure. I can imagine the overt and covert hackers are most likely the most difficult ones to be really in a circle with, especially if you're trying to work with leadership or even working with these people as employees. And it's one of the most challenging groups you can have in your hands.
It is. And they're very, very skilled at manipulating people and at manipulating situations. So with leaders, what I work with them on is if you have the power to problem solve, you got to problem solve. And that's, if you want to continue working here, this behavior will not be tolerated. And you want to go through your HR process, you want to have your ducks in a row, but oftentimes companies and individuals will kick somebody to another department. I worked with a Fortune 100 company that every listener would know what it was. And they had a hacker that they had done into 4 divisions. They all knew who he was. They just traded him off. And I looked at the senior vice president who had brought me in to work with all of her leaders. And I'm like, when are we going to take care of the problem instead of giving the problem to other people and making their life hell? Because what happens is
I often hear this, Sherene, by the way. I hear this story a lot.
Well, so that's one of the key things that leaders and workplaces are responsible for, creating psychological safety in the workplace. Right. And so it is not just the leader who has to tolerate this. These people pick a target. These people terrorize people, the stress that they cause and the mental health issues and anguish that their victims suffer, not to mention the whole thing is silent shame, wound. So you don't get the best out of people because nobody wants the guns turned on them or to be bullied. And so really smart people go silent. And they just tolerate it. So in order to have employees who are flourishing, in order to have organizations that are flourishing, you have to have psychological safety. Otherwise, what happens is people turn their energy inward to figure out what just happened
Exactly.
and how do I protect myself in the future. And anytime our energy is turned inward, you know as well as I do, it can't go to creating our dreams. It can't go to problem solving. It can't go to creating the next best thing that a company has to offer the world, because it's all turned inward to self-protect.
It's all turned inward and the harmony is completely off. You
Yeah,
need the
and
harmony for the creative flow.
you have said that right. You need harmony for the creative flow, and we need trust. And here's the thing, if any of you are battling this, because I battled this peer-to-peer thinking that everybody cared about relationships and that we could solve any problem with a civil conversation. And I believe that with 80% of the population. But for people who are lacquer hackers, if they don't learn conflict resolution skills, they'll be so defensive. They can be the biggest bully. They can be a gossip. They can just do really destructive behavior. But I don't know where I was going with that.
That's okay. We're basically just describing the complications of these
Yes.
individuals and the disharmony that they bring.
Yes,
And
trust. That's
yeah.
the thing, is the leader. Peer-to-peer, you don't have the power to take care of it. The research says when somebody's in an abusive relationship, you need a powerful third party. So I had a hacker who was a colleague. He was a lacquer hacker. I mean, I had the audacity to disagree with him, and he's just like yelling at me, spitting on my face. And I mean, literally this close to my nose. And I'm like, whoa, what nerve did I just step on? And I tried to work with him through it. And through the years, he would just, anytime I disagreed with him, all guns on me. And everybody's watching, because everybody knows that what he's telling me is, if you dare cross me, I will eviscerate you. You will suffer and regret that decision. And he's telling everybody else, don't cross me, because I rule the roost. And so peer to peer, I couldn't do anything, even though I tried. And then he became my boss. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? And I thought, every time he's ever done this, I've given him the courtesy of a closed door private conversation. And every time I've ever talked to him, he yells at me and he abusively kicks me out of his office. And I thought, well, that doesn't work. So what am I going to do? And so what I decided was, I was going to talk to him, but I would no longer give him the courtesy of a one-on-one conversation. So I went into his office. He's my new boss. And I say to him, if you ever take me on in public again, I will take you on back. And I was part of a unionized faculty. And I said, and if you treat me unfairly, I will grieve you. I felt like a 2-year-old stomp. And he got so mad and he kicked me out of his office. So about 6 weeks later, he was mad about something I had done, and he sent me a letter of reprimand. That's not good leadership. You talk to people, and then if that doesn't change it, then you give them a plan. And if that doesn't change it, you give them X amount of notice. And with hackers, especially the overt and the covert hackers, like if you say you have 30 days to correct this, and it goes away after 30 days, on day 31, they're back to their old tricks. So you got to go, we have 30 days to correct this. And if it happens again, you will be terminated. Put that in there. And other things that leaders can do is put into evaluations, treats others with civility and respect, engages in conflict resolution as appropriate. Though if those get measured, people will begin to act differently. But anyway, he gives me this letter and I'm like, I'm not talking to him. It's not safe. So I called up the dean and I'm like, I want a meeting with you and the department chair. He's like, okay. And so we go in, and this man who is the hugest alligator who would eat me for lunch, and with the powerful third party, he acted like a kitty cat. It was the most amazing transformation I've ever seen. And that was a light bulb moment. And I went, they act differently around powerful people than they do peer-to-peer or people under them. And so we worked out a win-win solution that we could both agree on, and it transformed our relationship. And he retired 8 years later. And I actually had tears of sorrow. I was losing somebody that I had grown to respect and admire. He had become a friend. He had never done a gator hacker behavior again to me. And he was an ally in a pretty dysfunctional department where allies were hard to come by. And I went, all because a powerful third party was involved. So you cannot solve it peer to peer. If you have a leader, problem solve. If you cannot solve it, move quickly into problem management. And as a leader, how do I protect my team? As an individual, how do I protect myself and not keep bloodying my head against the same brick wall? What is it that I need to do here? Because if you're like me, sometimes it just takes me a while to figure things out. And in this case, it took me about 8 years to figure that out. And I had one other hacker, really, he was a lacquer hacker, she was an overt hacker. And it took me 16 years, and an outsider, a new faculty member is like, why do you do it? Do what? You always do it. Do what? You take the bait. She dangles the bait in front of you and you take it. I'm like, wow, I don't know. Think about it. She was spot on, but I just kept doing the same dance because I'm like, I'm not going to let you bully me. I'm not going to let you bully students. I'm not going to let you bully other people. That's that do the right thing in me. But everybody else would just put their head down and go silent. And of course, I judged them as weak and uncaring, and they probably judged me as, yeah, can't she keep the peace? And doesn't she know when to shut up? So anyway, once I got that little bit of information from an outside source who was watching, I was able to make adjustments. And one of the things that I learned to say was the tone of this conversation is no longer professional in nature. I also learned just to be quiet instead of biting at the bait. And the first time that I did that, she came into the next faculty meeting and she said, my daddy always said, when you're the one who loses it, you're the one who loses. And I'm like, that's not an apology. But it was the first time she looked like the jerk instead of me looking like a jerk tangling her. And she did not like that. So you just want to keep your peace, keep your boundaries. You don't have to get the bite on the bait. But again, it's so helpful to have mentors, to have people who are truth tellers in your life, to work with counselors. And if you want a life with less fear, it's like, oh, do the work and then take baby steps. And the biggest thing I would say from careers is build your runway, because if you have runway, you give yourself room to fail. Because I watch people like quit jobs because they're desperate and they can't take it anymore, but they don't have money set aside and they don't have another job, and they quickly get themselves in financial stress and struggles. And it's like a crash and burn. And I've watched where people never ever try again, but it's because they didn't set themselves up for success. I'm sure you've seen the same thing and heard that story as well.
Definitely. I love your outlook on conflict resolutions. I love build your runway, keep your peace and your boundary. I took some incredible notes here, Sherene. This is awesome. Take the leap of faith, follow your joy. You've got whispers of the soul. Head towards a thing that energizes you, hot and cold. This has been really amazing. Thank you so much for being on A Little Less Fear podcast. Where can our viewers or watchers find you and your books?
So you can find me at ShereneMcHenry.com. It's ShereneMchenry.com. The books are on the website and audiobooks are coming out soon. I'm super excited about
that. Is exciting.
And I just want to say, you ask the best questions. Your training as a therapist is ideal to be a really good host. And this has been so much fun. Thank you for the privilege of a really fascinating conversation.
Sherene, you're incredible. I would love to watch you speak. I mean, I had the honor and the privilege to have you speak on my podcast, but seeing you in front of a bunch of people would be even more energetic and more energizing and more joyful. Sherene, thank you so much for sharing your love, light, and all of your energy and your wisdom. I really appreciate you and all of your time and your efforts. I wish you tons more success and much more joy in your life. Thank you so much for being on A Little Less Fear podcast.
Thank you. It has been the absolute privilege, just an absolute privilege. You're wonderful at what you do.
And it's my pleasure. Thank you so much. Take care now.